Welcome to the new video of NeuroPhilos. Get ready to dive into a gripping tale that will leave you breathless, thinking, and inspired. Whether you're here for the mystery, the drama, or the unexpected twists, you're in the right place. Make sure to hit that like button, drop a comment, and subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. Let's begin. The birth of the ego. A child enters the world without a sense of separation. In those earliest years, there is no I and you, no boundaries that divide the self from everything else. There is only being, a state of pure presence, unself-conscious and unfragmented. The infant does not yet carry the burden of identity, it simply exists, responding instinctively to hunger, touch, warmth, and love. But slowly, somewhere around the age of 4, a transformation begins. A new awareness emerges, subtle at first but profound in its consequences. The child begins to say, I. This moment may seem small, but it is revolutionary. The sense of I marks the birth of the ego, the formation of a mental center that claims ownership of experiences, choices, and emotions. It is as though the child clenches a first small fist around identity, grasping at the idea of selfhood. For the first time, there is a division. The world is no longer simply experienced, it is related to someone. I am hungry. I am angry. I am afraid. Identity takes form, and along with it comes a new way of perceiving reality. At first, this ego seems harmless, even useful. It creates structure where before there was only fluidity. It allows the child to navigate a complex world, to distinguish self from other, to claim possession over thoughts, toys, and feelings. The ego provides the foundation for individuality, for the ability to say, this is me. But what begins as a small tool soon grows into a tyrant. The child begins to believe that this voice, the ego, is all that they are. That the stream of thoughts, judgments, and choices defines the entirety of the self. You, too, were once that child. And as you grew, you came to believe that the decisions you make, the emotions you feel, the thoughts you think are the direct product of your conscious will. You imagine yourself to be the commander of your life, steering it with reason and control. But what if this is the greatest illusion of all? Carl Jung, one of the most profound voices in psychology, warned of this mistake. The ego, he explained, is not the whole self but only a fragment. It is like a mask worn upon the vast and mysterious face of the psyche. Yet because the ego speaks loudly and constantly, we mistake it for our true identity. The mask convinces us it is the face. The actor convinces itself it is the role. This is where suffering begins. When you believe that the ego is the entirety of your being, you begin to live in a prison without realizing it. You live for appearances, chasing approval, terrified of rejection. You mold yourself to the expectations of others, confusing adaptation with authenticity. You may achieve everything others call success, money, status, recognition, and still feel strangely empty, as though something essential has been left behind. And that sense of loss is real, because in giving all your power to the ego, you abandon your essence. The ego thrives on control. It wants to organize your story, polish your image, keep everything coherent and predictable. But to achieve this false stability, it amputates parts of who you are. Since childhood, you were taught to repress emotions that seemed dangerous or inconvenient: anger, fear, envy, grief. You learned to smile when you wanted to cry, to obey when you wanted to resist. The ego made a deal: in exchange for safety and belonging, you must silence your deeper truth. And so the ego became king. It was meant to be a messenger, a guide, a useful reference point. Instead, it claimed the throne of your psyche, ruling with fear of failure, rejection, and weakness. It tells you that you are rational while trembling at the possibility of exposure. It tells you that you are strong while crumbling under the weight of criticism. It tells you that you are free while keeping you chained to comparison and approval. But perhaps the most dangerous illusion is that you believe this is normal life. That to feel tired, anxious, and disconnected is simply part of adulthood. That constant striving, endless proving, relentless self-sabotage is what it means to live. Yet these are not signs of maturity. They are symptoms of ego unchecked, a fragile construct pretending to be your essence. Jung compared the ego to a small island floating in the vast ocean of the psyche. It is limited, temporary, and partial. Yet when you mistake the island for the whole, you cut yourself off from the depths that could truly nourish you. You confuse personality with soul. You mistake survival for fulfillment. And the result is a life lived half asleep, repeating cycles you do not understand, held captive by fears you cannot name. The first step, then, is recognition. To see the ego for what it is, not an enemy, not a hero, but a mask. A tool that believes itself to be the master. An illusion that, once unmasked, reveals how much of your suffering has been unnecessary. Only when you see this clearly can you begin the journey inward, beyond the mask, beyond the island, into the deeper waters of the self. The mask and the shadow. If the ego is the voice that says I am, then the persona is the mask it wears for the world. Carl Jung described the persona as the social face of the ego, the performance we put on to be accepted, admired, and loved. It is the edited version of who we are, carefully crafted to survive in a world that constantly judges. From childhood, we are taught what is acceptable and what must be hidden. Crying too much? Weakness. Anger? Disrespect? Envy? Ugly? Desire? Selfish. We learn quickly which parts of us earn approval and which draw disapproval, shame, or punishment. And so we begin to hide. Piece by piece, we repress our emotions, silence our instincts, and lock away the impulses that don't fit the script. The persona is born, polished, polite, controlled. On the outside, it is functional. On the inside, it is incomplete. At first glance, the persona seems helpful. It allows us to navigate society, to adapt to school, family, work. It shields us from rejection by showing only what is safe. But this safety comes at a cost. The more we identify with the persona, the further we drift from our essence. You begin to confuse who you really are with the mask you wear. You act strong but feel fragile. You appear in control but live in chaos. Outwardly, everything looks fine. Inwardly, you are carrying a muffled scream. The danger of the persona is that you start to believe it is your true identity. The ego fulfills its most insidious function not only by hiding your wounds but by convincing you they don't exist. You become a stranger to yourself, mistaking performance for reality. And yet, all that has been silenced doesn't disappear. What consciousness rejects does not vanish, it sinks. Beneath the surface, in the depths of the unconscious, everything that was repressed collects. This is what Jung called the shadow. It is the repository of all the traits, emotions, and desires that the ego and persona refuse to acknowledge. Your anger, jealousy, fear, selfishness, grief, lust, and pain, all the parts of you deemed unworthy, live on in the shadow. The shadow is not lifeless. It is alive, growing silently in the dark. And because you refuse to look at it, it expresses itself indirectly. It shows up as impulsive reactions, self-sabotage, projections onto others, addictions, and unexplained anxieties. The shadow is like a child you've locked in the basement. It cannot leave, but it will bang on the walls until you hear it. This is why the persona, though necessary, is ultimately suffocating. It filters your being, narrowing it down to what is socially acceptable, while the rest of you clamors for expression. Think about the times you felt exhausted by simply keeping up appearances. Think about the moments when you smiled while secretly breaking inside. That exhaustion is the cost of maintaining the mask. And yet, everyone wears one. This is not a personal flaw but a collective condition. Society demands masks, and we all comply. The tragedy begins when we forget that the mask is not our face. When the persona becomes our only identity, the shadow grows more dangerous. What you reject controls you. What you ignore dominates you. If you deny anger, it may erupt as cruelty. If you deny desire, it may twist into obsession. If you deny fear, it may paralyze you in moments that require courage. But here lies a paradox: the shadow, though frightening, is also the gateway to wholeness. Everything you hide holds energy, vitality, creativity. The emotions you repress contain truths about what you care about most deeply. Anger reveals where your boundaries are violated. Fear exposes what you long to protect. Envy points to desires you have not owned. Within the darkness is the raw material of authenticity. Jung often said that individuation, the process of becoming whole, requires a confrontation with the shadow. Not to destroy it, not to purify yourself of it, but to integrate it. To accept that you are both light and dark, generous and selfish, compassionate and cruel. To be human is to contain contradictions. The shadow is not your enemy, it is the part of you longing to be recognized, to be loved, to be brought back into the circle of your being. Yet the ego resists this reconciliation. It wants coherence, control, cleanliness. It does not want chaos, contradiction, or discomfort. So it doubles down on the persona, convincing you that everything is fine, that the mask is enough. Meanwhile, the shadow continues to grow, shaping your life from the unconscious. This is why so many feel an unnameable emptiness. You live as though half of you is exiled, and in truth, it is. The persona is safe but incomplete. The shadow is dangerous but essential. Together they form the tension that drives your inner life. To ignore the shadow is to live a half-life. To embrace it is to begin the journey toward wholeness. The mask may keep you alive in the world, but the shadow holds the key to truly living. Signs of ego's sabotage. By now, you've seen how the ego builds a mask, the persona, and how the shadow grows beneath it, storing everything you reject. But how can you tell if the ego has taken over your life? The truth is, most of the time you don't notice. You think you're acting freely, making conscious choices. In reality, you're being pulled by patterns you don't understand, habits that seem natural but are quietly destructive. The ego is clever. It doesn't scream its presence, it whispers. It convinces you that its defenses are strength, that its fears are logic, that its cravings are ambition. The first sign is the hunger for approval. Do you constantly seek recognition? Do you feel restless unless someone notices your efforts? This isn't strength. It's dependency disguised as motivation. The ego cannot survive without validation. Applause, likes, compliments, these become food. Without them, the ego feels it is disappearing. You think you are working hard out of discipline or ambition, but beneath it lies fear, fear of not being seen, fear of not being enough. Another sign is comparison. The ego is obsessed with measuring worth against others. When you see someone succeed, do you feel envy rise like a shadow inside you? Or when you see someone struggle, do you feel an uncomfortable relief that at least you are doing better? This is not growth. It is insecurity masquerading as competition. The ego does not seek true evolution. It seeks superiority. It needs to know you are above someone, anyone, in order to feel safe. Then there is the fear of mistakes. Do you freeze when you must make decisions, paralyzed by the possibility of failure? Do you overthink, weighing 1,000 possibilities but never acting on one? This isn't prudence. It's the ego terrified of appearing weak. To fail would mean admitting imperfection, and the ego interprets that as annihilation. Better to stay stuck than to risk falling. Better to call it caution than admit it is fear. The ego also reveals itself in the need to be right. How often do you find yourself arguing not for truth, but for victory? You push for the last word, even if it damages the relationship. You cling to your perspective, even when another's might hold wisdom. This isn't reason. It's ego defending its illusion of control. When someone challenges your ideas, the ego takes it as a threat to your very identity. It would rather sacrifice connection than surrender its fragile pride. And then there is self-sabotage. You delay opportunities. You refuse help. You push away people who could support you. You hesitate when doors open. On the surface, you might explain it as bad luck or poor timing. But underneath, the ego fears change. It fears the unknown more than it fears suffering. So it convinces you to stay where you are, stuck but familiar. The ego prefers a predictable prison to the risk of freedom. These signs may seem small, but together they weave a web. Superficial relationships. Inability to trust. Unresolved resentments. A constant vague sadness, like a cloud that never lifts. These are not random. They are symptoms of ego sabotage. And the longer you feed them, the more you drift from your essence. The cruelest truth is this: the ego has no interest in your happiness. It does not care if you feel alive or fulfilled. Its only concern is survival. As long as it maintains control, it is satisfied, even if that means keeping you miserable. It thrives on fear, shame, and dissatisfaction, because these emotions keep you clinging to it. The ego would rather you remain small, restless, and afraid than risk being dissolved by transformation. This is why patterns repeat. You may recognize them, you may even want to change them, but something inside resists. That something is the ego. It whispers, stay safe. Don't risk it. You're not ready. You'll fail. It's too late. You believe these voices are your own thoughts, but they are the ego defending its throne. Look closely at your life. Do you see the repetition? The cycles of doubt, avoidance, and regret? The broken relationships, the opportunities missed, the silence where there should have been courage? These are not coincidences. They are the fingerprints of the ego. And yet, recognizing them is already a first step. Once you begin to observe, the illusion weakens. You start to realize that these patterns are not destiny but conditioning. They are habits of the mind, not truths of the soul. Jung taught that awareness cracks the armor of the ego. The moment you stop identifying with it blindly, you begin to reclaim your freedom. But here is the paradox: the ego will not surrender easily. It clings to you like a shadow afraid of the light. It sabotages not because it is evil, but because it was built to protect you. It thinks it is saving you from pain, when in truth, it is keeping you from living. The question is, will you continue obeying its commands, or will you begin to challenge them? Because to move forward, you must confront not just the signs of sabotage, but the deeper reason behind them, the ego's desperate fear of change. And that is what we must explore next. Fear of change. By now, you can see how the ego sabotages you in subtle ways, seeking approval, fearing mistakes, clinging to control. But a deeper question remains: why is it so hard to change, even when you know your patterns are harming you? Why, despite awareness, do you return to the same cycles? The answer lies in the ego's most primitive instinct, its fear of transformation. The ego was created to protect you. From childhood, it served as a shield, helping you survive rejection, shame, and the pain of being judged. But the shield hardened into armor, and the armor became a prison. Change threatens this armor, so the ego resists with all its strength. It is not laziness or weakness that keeps you stuck. It is the ego's terror of being dismantled. Think of it like this: the ego survives on certainties. It needs to know who you are, what the world is, and what to expect from others. These certainties may be false, but they provide stability. They create a story: I am this kind of person. The world works in this way. These are the rules of life. You may suffer inside that story, but at least it feels familiar. And familiarity, for the ego, is safer than freedom. To change means questioning those stories. It means admitting that much of what you believed about yourself was just adaptation, a survival role, not your true essence. For the ego, this feels like death. Jung warned that true transformation is not a gentle awakening but a collapse. It is a descent into the unconscious, a confrontation with the shadow. And the ego fears this descent more than anything. That is why, when you begin to grow, the ego fights back. It creates distractions. It stirs up dramas. It whispers excuses: you're not ready. It's not the right time. This is nonsense. It makes you cling to routines, habits, and identities that no longer serve you. It tells you that staying in a painful certainty is better than stepping into an uncertain possibility. The ego would rather you live in a familiar hell than risk an unfamiliar heaven. This fear of change is not abstract. You can feel it in your body, the tension in your chest when you think of making a bold choice, the paralysis before speaking your truth, the hesitation that keeps you in patterns you've outgrown. It is the ego pulling you back, terrified that you will outgrow the mask it has so carefully built. But here is the secret: the ego only has power when you believe it is you. Once you begin to observe it, the illusion weakens. You realize, this is not my essence. This is a structure, a habit, a mechanism. Awareness loosens the grip. You see the ego for what it is, a part of you, but not the whole of you. Jung described this deeper truth as the self, the totality of your being, the center beyond the ego. To reach it, you must endure what feels like chaos. You must confront the shadow, face what has been denied, and accept the contradictions within you. This is why self-knowledge is so rare. It is not a peaceful walk through light, it is a descent into darkness. And most people would rather remain on the surface than risk that confrontation. Yet, paradoxically, it is only through this descent that freedom is found. The fear of change is, in truth, the ego's fear of death. It senses that if you fully awaken, it will no longer rule. And so it clings, like a cornered animal, to its illusions of control. It keeps you small, predictable, and restless, not because it is cruel, but because it is afraid. Still, you are not condemned to live under its rule. The moment you begin to see the ego's fear clearly, something else awakens in you. A quieter center. A deeper presence. This is the self-stirring. It does not demand control. It does not seek approval. It simply is. And in that presence lies a freedom the ego can never give you. But to reach that freedom, you must walk through the chaos. You must dismantle illusions, confront the repressed, and endure the discomfort of shedding old skins. It is a terrifying process, but also a liberating one. The ego will resist, but if you have the courage to keep going, you will discover that on the other side of fear is something greater, authenticity. In the next chapter, we will explore how to begin this journey of integration, how to place the ego in its rightful role, not as master but as servant, and how to live from the deeper ground of the self. Integration and beyond. Now that you have seen the prison, the question becomes, how do you escape? How do you stop being a hostage to the fragile, controlling, fearful ego? The answer is not to destroy it. You cannot kill the ego any more than you can kill your own heartbeat. It is part of you, a necessary function of the psyche. Without the ego, you could not navigate daily life, organize your identity, or interact with the world. The task is not elimination, but placement. The ego must be restored to its rightful role, servant, not master. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the path of becoming whole. To individuate is to integrate, to bring together all parts of yourself, the persona, the shadow, the ego, and the deeper self. It is not about polishing yourself into perfection but embracing the totality of who you are. Light and dark. Strength and weakness. Courage and fear. Only then do you live as a complete human being. The first step is brutal honesty. Stop hiding behind justifications. Ask yourself, who am I without my roles? Who am I when no one is watching? Who am I without the masks, without the performance, without the endless need to please? These questions are uncomfortable because they strip away the familiar illusions. But this discomfort is the sign that something real is stirring within you. Next comes the work of facing the shadow. This is not a poetic metaphor, it is deep psychological labor. You must recognize that you feel anger, envy, pride, lust, fear, vanity, all the things you were taught to repress. These traits are not monsters. They are abandoned children of your psyche, banging on the walls of your unconscious, demanding to be acknowledged. When ignored, they sabotage you. When embraced, they become energy, creativity, authenticity. Dialogue with your shadow. Do not judge it. Listen to it. Ask, what are you trying to protect? What truth do you carry? You may discover that your anger hides a longing for respect, that your envy points to unclaimed desires, that your fear signals where you need courage most. Integration does not mean indulging every impulse, but it does mean owning them as part of you. Ignored, they control you. Accepted, they enrich you. This is the moment something new emerges, the self. Jung described it as the true center of the psyche, deeper than the ego, wider than any role or persona. The self does not crave applause or control. It does not fear criticism or comparison. It simply is. When you live from the self, you no longer act out of insecurity. You respond from presence. You no longer scramble to fit in. You stand in your essence. You no longer confuse survival with fulfillment. You begin to taste freedom. But here is the caution, the ego is cunning. Even as you awaken, it will try to disguise itself in new forms. It may hide behind spirituality, convincing you that you are enlightened. It may wear the mask of authenticity, boasting about how real you are. It may even use your progress to inflate itself. Whenever you think, "I've finally arrived," pause and ask, who is speaking now? Is it the self, or is it the ego in another costume? Integration is not a destination. It is a practice, an ongoing vigilance. There is no final arrival, no point where you can declare victory. There is only presence. Each day, you must descend again into yourself, confront the illusions, and return to your deeper center. This requires humility, the humility to admit that the ego never disappears, it only shifts. And yet, this is the beauty of the journey. You do not need to destroy the ego to live free. You only need to see it clearly. Once it is exposed, its power fades. Once you recognize its tricks, you stop obeying them. You stop reacting. You begin responding. You choose. You create. The ego becomes what it was always meant to be, a useful tool, no longer a tyrant. When that happens, your relationships change. They are no longer transactions built on fear or performance. They become connections rooted in authenticity. Your emotions change. Pain does not vanish, but it stops ruling you. Fear may still whisper, but it no longer commands. The compulsion to prove, to please, to control begins to dissolve. And so you step into a quieter, deeper life. Not a perfect life, but a whole one. The ego no longer dictates who you must be. The self guides instead, steady, vast, unshaken by approval or rejection. For the first time, you live not as a mask, but as yourself. The work does not end here. It never ends. But if you have walked this far, you already know the truth: you are not your ego. You are more. And that discovery is the beginning of real freedom.